All right, we're live. So then when we hit the time, you can feel free to take it away whenever you would like.
Hello, everyone. This is the Oncology Research Professionals Site Operations Meeting. Welcome to the SWOG Virtual Fall Meeting 2020. We really appreciate the time that you take to spend with all of us here across the country as we look at what's happening across SWOG. Please advance, Bill. One more. Just a few logistics details as we begin. This session is being recorded. So we are going to help you by keeping your phone on mute to help with sound quality. But we would ask that if you have questions that you submit them all throughout the meeting via the chat and the Q&A icon at the bottom of your box on your screen. We will be presenting them to the speakers during the Q&A segment of the meeting. There will be slides and a recording of the presentations posted on the SWOG website within a few weeks. There are no formal CE credits for this meeting, but you may keep a copy of the printed agenda to reflect your attendance. With that, I would like to begin the core content of our meeting. We have a lot to cover here during our session. Our first presenter will be Grace Mishkin, who's going to share with us the NCI update. We have a number of illustrious leaders from SWOG sharing with us today as are listed here, and this is the order that they'll be presenting in. And as this day winds down, I just would encourage you to stay to the end. I realize for those of you in Eastern time zones, we're encroaching upon dinner and going home time, but the last portion of our meeting today is really designed to be as filling and rewarding for your heart and soul, as well as your mind. So thanks again for your participation, and let's begin the content for today's meeting. First, I would like to introduce Grace Mishkin, who comes to us from the NCI. Grace supports clinical trials operations at NCI's Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program with a focus on NCTN operations. So welcome, Grace, especially during the busyness of this life season. We really appreciate you being here. Grace, I'm not sure that we can hear you. Is there by chance a mute button still on somewhere?
I'm so sorry. Yes, there were 2 mutes. My apologies, everyone.
Thank you.
You got a great video of me talking to myself. Sorry, everyone. So yeah, I'm Grace Mishkin at the NCI. My email address is grace.mishkin@nih.gov. And I just wanted to share with you a message of appreciation primarily. I don't have any slides because there are many NCI updates that have been coming out over the past 6 months, but I think everyone has been remarkably on top of all of them. We've seen that the sites have adapted incredibly well, and the message that I have from NCI leadership, from all of my colleagues, is that we are continually astounded by how well the sites have held up under incredibly challenging circumstances, and how grateful we are for all of the work that you're doing to keep the NCTN moving. We know that you all care deeply about the mission that you're working on of helping cancer patients, helping advance cancer treatments. And I think there's not been any time that we've seen that more. And it really has been something that, you know, everyone truly appreciates and truly understands that it has been so difficult, but that you've held up, and we really appreciate it. We hope that we've had some opportunities to share our appreciation. We want to keep taking the advantage of those opportunities. But please, I hope you do feel thanked by me personally, by everyone I work with, by NCI, because it couldn't happen without you. That's sort of the feel-good message. I know that despite that message, unfortunately, things are hard. And in some ways, you know, we're adding to some of the difficulty in some cases. We've tried to make some things easier to cope with the pandemic situations. But one of the things that unfortunately aligned with the situation is the fact that we are expanding the use of the delegation of task logs, the DTL. That's something that I have spoken with you about before, and I do understand that it's a burdensome activity, and it's not something that we were doing before. And I think, unfortunately, we rolled it out in a way without understanding all of the impacts that it was going to have. We have, unfortunately, continued to get feedback from the FDA and other regulatory agencies that it's essential that we have something like this in place for our IND studies. And so the expansion is moving forward. I think the schedule is that all phase 2, 3, and phase 3 studies that activated as of this August are required to have the DTL, and all phase 2 and earlier trials will need to have it if they activate starting in the beginning of October or later. We're also encouraging groups to consider adding the DTL to any studies that have already activated if there's any chance that those studies will be used for FDA registration, because the registration process, using a study for FDA registration for a new drug indication, it will be incredibly difficult if we don't have some sort of DTL process in place. Unfortunately, the DTL is not a project that I work very closely on, so I'm not able to share with you all of the details around that, but I know that they have been working on efforts that are supposed to make it easier. Some of those were supposed to be released at the end of the summer, and I think that was the goal, was to have those efforts sort of rolled out in time for the new activations of those phase 3 studies with the DTLs, but I think as always happens, and we should have prepared for with technical changes, there have been some delays around those. And so I don't think all of the improvements have reached you yet. I guess my primary message would be that your feedback has actually been very important. I know it hasn't, the process hasn't improved as much as we'd like to have seen it improved, but I would say that the improvements that have been made, I'd tie back to the feedback that you've given, because you know, being able to say that we heard from sites specifically the impact that a specific process is having, a difficulty that it's creating for your workflow. Andrea Denikoff and myself, we can take that feedback and talk to the people who are leading the projects, because the tech side doesn't always have as many connections to the site side, and the things that make sense from a technical perspective often don't make as much sense on the site from the site perspective. So my email address is grace.mishkin@nih.gov. If it wasn't included in previously, Connie has my full permission to share it broadly. You can email feedback to me directly. You can also email feedback to the NCTN program email box, and I have it, which is nctnprogram@mail.nih.gov. And either way, if you have feedback specifically about ways that the DTL is continuing to be burdensome, specifically, you know, I think some things are always going to be burdensome. We're not going to be able to get rid of it. But if you have suggestions for things that could make it easier, the more people we hear from, the more sort of we can use that to really try to get changes made. So please do email me as you have feedback, and especially as the hopeful improvements roll out, if they aren't working, if there are still gaps that you're seeing, we can try to bring those back. So those are the two big areas. I think I also wanted to mention, many of you are participating. Your sites have already activated the NCI COVID or NCAP study. Thank you so much. That's been a top priority for NCI leadership, and they've been really astounded by how quickly it's been taken up across the NCTN and NCORE, and how eagerly many of your sites have participated. It is a very different trial than the majority of trials that are run through our networks. The data collection is, the burden is much more on the data collection, since there isn't a treatment associated with it. And I think you've also probably seen the challenges that come when parts of the NCI that are not used to writing protocols end up being called to write protocols and design case report forms. So thank you for putting up with our learning process as we get this in place, and thank you for your participation in the study. And if you have any questions about that, you can also reach out to me and I can connect you with the study team. Those were the two big things I wanted to say, and I'll be around for questions that can be sent in through the chat box. And then I'll also continue to reply to questions if they come into my email. So thank you all.
Thank you, Grace. We will be asking participants to submit any questions or comments throughout the session. And if you're able to stay on, we will have a Q&A session later in the session. So would love for you to address those questions at that time if you're able. Thank you. So let's move to the next section. So Bill, if you could advance the slide. Next up is Group Chair's Office, and we're going to cover comments from study finance and some membership. But Casey Dawson, our Assistant Director of Administration for SWOG, Pat Mize, Grants and Contracts Manager, as well as Kyle Teague, Senior Grants and Contracts Coordinator, will be sharing with us their thoughts and insights. So Casey, are you on? Take it away.
I am. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us. I know Kyle and Pat want to get down to the business part, but I wanted to just say a quick hello. I can't echo Grace's thanks enough. And, you know, I know since March, the Group Chair's Office here in Portland, Oregon, our Ops Office down in Texas, and our Foundation in Michigan have all been working remotely, which has provided some challenges, as you all may know. I know that our SDMC is also operating largely in the virtual realm, if not completely in the virtual realm. And I'm thankful that we have been able to transition relatively seamlessly in spite of all of the challenges. And I know that you all are facing your own slew of challenges as well. So I just wanted to jump on and say thank you. Thank you for all of the work. Thank you for continuing to make good things happen for SWOG and for patients. And we just really appreciate all of the effort that's being put forth right now. And second, echo from Grace, we must be on the same wavelength. I really wanted to just make sure you know to be in touch with any feedback that you might have. Really great things have come from site and member feedback. And if you have questions about funding, coverage analyses, anything else, you know how to find us. Our emails and phone numbers are out on the SWOG website, and we are largely available. So thanks again, and I will hand it off to Pat and Kyle.
Hello, can we go to the next slide? Hi, I'm Pat Mize, Grants and Contracts Manager for the Group Chair's Office. And I just wanted to take a moment really quickly to highlight a particular CTSU update, just to make sure that everybody is aware of it. Next slide. So this came out in the, I believe, the August update for the CTSU website. So the update is that they've added a 1-year time limit for adding submission dates in the open funding tab. So that those particular fields won't take dates, submission dates that are later than that. So I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that, and just in case, because it was in those updates, I just want to make sure you guys knew it. And that is it. And next slide. And if you have any questions or anything, or if you need to get a hold of us, our general email address is funding@swog.org. And I'll give it over to Kyle.
Thanks, Pat. My slides, can everyone hear me? That's good. My slides are kind of redundant, but just a quick review of things I've presented at past group meetings on the federal site payment transition. So we can go to the next slide. Just a little background in case any of this is new to any of you. So the fixed price subawards for federal member site payments are now required per the NCI. The change went into effect for both NCTN and NCORP funding back in 2019. Non-federal site payments are not, I repeat, not affected by any of this stuff. So in terms of non-federal payments for SWOG studies, that still goes through your purchase service agreement with SWOG CTP. So that is good. Next slide. The things that will remain the same since this new mandate took into effect last spring, payment triggers. So we're still having the same enrollments, entering information into open. SWOG doesn't accept invoices unless it's specifically mentioned in a funding memo. The funding amounts will continue to be stated on the funding memos. There's no F&A, even though these are subawards, there's no F&A involved. And then in terms of the distribution, the payments are still processed monthly. They come from me at the group chair's office, and they're accompanied by payment report emails. So you're getting notified that payments are coming. You'll have the breakdown of what's getting paid, patient ID, activity, invoice number, so you can reconcile. And then this was a question from the past, but I thought it was just important to bring up again. There's no requirement for additional financial reporting or progress reports or anything with these subawards. So the next slide, the changes that have been happening since 2019, fixed price subawards is the term, a separate subaward for both NCTN studies and NCORP studies. If you see the two bullet points in blue there, those are the 6-year grant cycles for both NCTN and NCORP. The subaward amounts for each site will vary based on past activity levels. And then if your site has an amount, let's say, and over that 6-year period, that amount becomes depleted, we can just create amendments to increase funding. So it's not a super scientific way to give each site funding. It's just, like I said, it's based on past activity. If your site is starting to become really active, we can make ways to just add funding to your agreement. And then a pretty important note, there can be additional funding that occasionally doesn't fall under one of these two subawards. So if we have a PSA with you already in place, they do not expire. So we're going to just leave those in place. It's really important because, again, if there was something down the road that was additional funding, we want to be able to have that mechanism in place that we can just continue to pay the site. Next slide. So this is the update. This is why I wanted to hop in quick. Again, starting in the summer of last year, which seems 42 years ago, and I started sending out NCTN and NCORP fixed price agreements to sites. And I'm doing them in phases because we have hundreds of sites, which means even hundreds more of agreements. And it was just based on outstanding amounts. So I think I'm at about 100 executed, but I mean, I'm still staring down the barrel of hundreds more, but there are agreements that are still outstanding, which means if the agreement's outstanding, so too are a site's payment, because I can't process those payments until the paperwork is in place. So going forward, and this is pretty much why I'm here, is that I'm going to continue starting next week to kind of get into my next phase. So if you maybe haven't heard from me, you should soon. If you have already and maybe you haven't got it back to me, I'll be following up. But it's really important. It is part of kind of your membership with SWOG to get these financial agreements in place so that we're all kind of straight and set up for going forward. And basically that red line at the bottom is my whole purpose here today is just if you don't know if your agreement's executed, you have any questions, you don't understand something, or just general payment questions for federal payments, just contact me. On the next slide, here is, like I say, here's my email address. As I'm working from my kitchen, again, I'm using my cell phone a lot more, so if you need that, I can definitely give that to you. But yeah, it's really important to get these in place, and once they're in place, I promise to not bother you. So until they are in place, I have to hold funds. So yeah, check with your staff, make sure you're getting your payments. If you're not, hit me up. And that is it. Continue to stay safe, and I think we can move on.
Thank you, Kyle. How little we realized how simple the good old days used to be, right? So thank you for continuing to be responsive when we have questions about all of this complicated stuff. Appreciate it. All right, so Bill, next slide. Our next presenter is Dana Sparks, Director of Operations and Protocols from the San Antonio office. Dana, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome and thank you.
I tried to start my video, but I'm not having very good luck with it, so you just have to do it without seeing my face. I don't have any slides. I just have general updates. And again, as with everyone, I am continuously amazed by both the amazing way that our staff has hit the ground running and able to keep going despite all of the interesting challenges we've had to face. And I see the exact same thing out at our participating sites. It's really something to be proud of. And so my piece is focused just a little bit on some of the things we've accomplished during this time. We had about a day and a half notice for our plan to begin 100% teleworking back in March, and our one IT guy was able to rebuild and repurpose our laptops that we had in the office for the purposes of supporting group meeting for people to be able to use at home if they didn't have already have a VPN connection. So we have been most of the office working from home since March, and I think in July, some of our staff members have started partially working from the office, but we're still very controlled about how many people can be in the building at the same time, and with all of the required precautions and cleaning requirements and everything. All of the staff were trained on all of the necessary hardware and VPN access so that people could work from home. during this time, we also had already planned for expanding our office space, which is kind of funny because now we have a much bigger office with nobody there. But we have been able to implement that. We've expanded the office space and created new space for new positions. We've hired people for 2 new positions and promoted 4 staff members and supported 2 lateral moves. So we've been continuing with all of that recruitment and hiring piece that is difficult under any circumstances, but probably even a little more difficult now. I think one thing that is particularly of interest to this whole group is that we finally were able to complete the single sign-on linkage to prepare for the full launch of the web integration of our learning management system. Now, this it's not completely done because the web programming still has to be finished, but everything, all of the programming in the background that allows for that single sign-on to occur has been done. So we are expecting that it will be much easier for us to provide you with access to our learning and training materials, and also to be able to make use of our lovely training manager, Lisa Barnstrom, to come up with new curriculum and new opportunities for training. We're really looking forward to being able to do that, and I think it'll be an area that we're expecting to expand over the next 2 to 3 years. So if you have ideas for training that you think would be particularly helpful in the SWOG environment that's not duplicative of something that's already out there, be sure to contact us. Either let me or Lisa know if you have ideas for training opportunities. And we've also launched a new conflict management disclosure system. So for those of you who help support your investigators at your site in terms of all of their reporting requirements for financial conflict of interest, one of the things that you should be aware of is that our new system now maintains their old disclosures, so that when they come into the system, they can basically check and update what's already there, which is a huge time saving for them, and for any of you who support your investigators in doing that, that you have the opportunity to work from the information that was already in the system, rather than having to start from scratch. And that was launched this year, and the collection process actually was faster and more complete than it was in our previous system. So I think it's a good sort of test of moving to the new system and ensuring that it worked well. It seems like everyone found it relatively easy to use. And then, of course, kudos to Courtney Willie, who both managed the conflict management system, but also managed both of these virtual group meetings, the more truncated one in April and this more full-scale one this fall, that has taken a lot of work and a lot of, as you can probably imagine, a need for flexibility and transition of skills that it's just a whole new world and different from our face-to-face meeting planning. And Courtney just took it on and rolled with it and did a fantastic job. We have been expanding our ability to conduct remote audits. Some of you have probably already experienced that. During this time between March and September, our audit team has done 138 audits, and about 90% of those were done remotely. We still have had some on-site audits, but very few. and they're in the works of documenting the standard operating procedures for the remote audits. It's clear that we'll be continuing to move in that direction and transitioning even in more normal times from requiring quite so much travel of our auditors. Some of you know that the new version of the CTC-AE is now in the works, and we have been working both with the NCI and internally to ensure that we provide updates to their process for evaluating and creating the new CTC-AE, and then also providing support and education to the sites for the process improvements on integrating the expedited reporting system from Medidata Rave through CTEP AIRS, sort of backing into now the new reporting process where the initial report goes into Rave and then it transitions into the CTEP AIRS system for serious adverse event reporting. We've also provided the support to sites regarding the requirements for COVID-19 expedited SAE reporting. There's not, it hasn't been a ton of that, but it's still a new process that has required us all to kind of jump in and adapt to the new requirements. And then in and among all of that, we've also activated 6 new trials over the last 6 months and continued to submit to protocols with 7 new protocols now under NCI review during that time frame. So continuing to move along, continuing to do what needs to be done. But for the future, I think it's really important to just kind of point out that as things have changed, we want to make sure that we keep all of the valuable things that we've learned from this experience and find ways to incorporate those processes that simplify what we do and make things easier for sites along the way. So we are working within our grant requirements, NCTN and NCORP guidance, to make sure that any changes that we make are consistent with what the NCI can allow us to do. But we're also reviewing, revising, and finding ways to document some details that will allow us some increased flexibility, both to site staff and hopefully, you know, down the road, it also will impact on ease for our patients as well. And we now, Dr. Blanke has developed a SWOG innovation working group to really take a look at all of that and making sure that that we're moving forward in a way that makes sense and that uses all of the available technology to best to create best practices to use in the future. And that group will be meeting virtually in January to really nail down some of those recommendations resulting from a lot of different perspectives, looking at some of the ASCO recommendations as well as you know, recommendations from a lot of our investigators who are on the front lines and participating directly in different practice settings so that we're able to kind of understand what the challenges are in the different practice settings. So both reflecting rural settings, community sites, academic sites, and what is available and how we can provide support to our sites over time. So I'm really looking forward to that because I think that in the long run, this whole experience is probably going to end up making our protocols better and more flexible, and also will allow us to better serve our site staff and our patients. It will have some bumps in the road along the way, but I think that our ability to adapt to this circumstance will actually strengthen us in being able to adapt to future circumstances, as well as just creating a product that's better for everyone. I think that's probably all I have, Connie.
Pandemic schmandemic. That's a phenomenal report, Dana. You would never even know we were all locked in at home and doing weird and strange things. So thank you for all of that phenomenal work and the seamless transition. That's pretty exciting. So next up is Connie Barnes, Programs Manager for Operations Membership side. Connie, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, we've been busy, pretty exceptionally busy over the last 6 months, and we hate to tell Kyle that we're going to add a little bit more workload to his collection of purchase service agreements. Our international presence is expanding, and we're in the process of bringing on board some sites in Chile and Uruguay, with Brazil to follow. So he'll have to track down those purchase service agreements. We have some changes in the works also, with sites changing membership coming up as well, switching from different membership programs. So we are going to definitely be busy too the next few months. The one thing I do want to mention, because I mentioned on the last call in the spring that we would be eliminating the SWOG credentialing process, and that would be effective September 1st. Well, we've had to delay that to October 1st since the Board of Governors didn't meet at the spring meeting. And so it is on their agenda for Saturday's meeting, so we hope we can move forward with that process. So that will definitely simplify everybody's paperwork, workload in submitting credentialing documents. But other than that, that's probably all I have.
I like the sounds of your school of thought. Simplifying, simplifying, simplifying. We'll take it.
We continually want to keep striving in that direction and simplifying and trying to help you with all of your workloads. So if you have any other suggestions or ideas, we will definitely take them.
All right. Thanks, Connie. All right, next slide. Next up is our wonderful Statistics and Data Management Center Insights. And presenting for us today would be Rodney Suter, Program Director for Therapeutic Studies, and Phyllis Goodman, our Coordinating Statistician and also Institutional Performance Guru. So Rodney, we'll start.
All right, thank you. Just checking to make sure you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. So hello, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. I've got a few updates from our office to cover, and then I'll turn this over to Phyllis Goodman, who will address some details surrounding specimen submission and current institution performance report statistics. Next slide. So I believe it was 1 year ago at the Alicia Symposium in Chicago, I announced the first edition of the CRA newsletter, and just a few weeks ago, we posted the 5th edition. We write and publish these quarterly, and I've tried a few different ways to broadcast them to you. One was by notifying head CRAs, and the other was utilizing the CRA listserv. We did receive some feedback from CRAs that the CRA listserv is preferred, so we'll continue doing that going forward. If you signed up to receive the listserv but haven't been getting these messages, I just suggest that you check your junk mail in case it got flagged there. We've had a lot of useful articles written, some by staff at the SDMC and others by you and your ORP colleagues. I've listed some of the topics here on the right, and most recently we started an advice column from the site perspective, focusing on something related to the COVID pandemic and how the site has been handling it. In the autumn edition, we had articles from the University of Arizona Cancer Center and the Cleveland Clinic. And if you have any advice you'd like to share from your institution, we encourage you to reach out and let us know. Next slide. We've had some sites contact us asking where the newsletters are saved. You'll always find the most recent version of the newsletter published on the welcome page of the CRA Workbench here in the upper right-hand corner. If you've missed any of the previous editions or want to revisit them, you can click on the CRA newsletter link found under resources here on the left. Next slide. I also wanted to give some recognition to two of our staff that have taken the lead in collecting, writing, and publishing each newsletter. Jacqueline Skurlock is one of our data coordinators, and Joni Harris is our quality assurance coordinator. Both I'm sure many of you have been in contact with for study-related questions. They both put in a lot of effort on these newsletters, and we hope you all appreciate reading them as you can. This was an initiative that both the ORP Exec Committee and the SDMC were interested in, but we want to make sure that the content is useful to you. So we encourage you to contribute to the newsletter anytime by reaching out to these two by email at cranewsletter@crab.org. Next slide. As you know, SWOG released the COVID-19 diagnosis and deviations form about 3 months ago. Many have been submitted online, either through RAVE or the CRA Workbench for pre-RAVE trials. However, we have heard from our auditing team that they're noticing quite a few that have been documented on a paper log at the site, but the staff have not yet submitted them in the EDC. So just a few tips for the submission of this form. There is no need to report deviations that are related to late data submission. It's more important to focus on documenting deviations that are related to patient care. Also, only submit this form to report positive test results and/or pandemic-related deviations. If neither apply to a given patient, you don't need to submit the form at all. As a reminder, if you continue to have questions about what is considered a minor or major deviation for this form, utilize the QA@swog.org email distribution list here at the bottom to reach the SWOG auditing team to assist you. Next slide. So we've also heard from institutions that have been overwhelmed with the number of deviations they had to report before the form was available, and they weren't sure where to get started. So SWOG currently submits reports to the CIRB summarizing deviation data. So we prioritize studies based on their renewal date. We posted the list in the first list in the summer edition of the CRA Workbench, and the current priority list is provided here if you're looking for a starting point in getting these entered. Next slide. I believe there was an image like this in a Frontline article sent out a few months back, but I thought I'd show an updated visual of how the SWOG accrual has been since the beginning of the pandemic through August. You can see that daily accrual fell to its lowest around the end of April, but we've been coming back little by little each month. It's not back to what our regular average was prior to this yet, but we're getting close. Next slide. Here is a table that covers SWOG accrual sorted by a committee. I realize this is a lot of data to see at once, but I'm just going to highlight a few items here. The table is split up where NCORE committees are in the top half and NCTN is in the lower half. The column highlighted in green towards the left show the pre-COVID accrual, and post-COVID accrual is to the right in light blue. Overall, accrual for NCORE committees were hit harder through the pandemic up to this point. The cells highlighted in light gold throughout represents months where accrual bounced back to pre-COVID numbers. So the committees that fared well throughout so far, where accrual didn't drop too much, were palliative and end of care, GU, lung, and lymphoma. This image, as well as the one in the previous slide, are also available in the current report of studies available on swog.org. Next slide. In other news, SWOG GU study S1605 will be headed to the FDA soon. This is one of our FDA registration trials, and the study has been kept in good shape, and current data has been received and also reviewed at the SDMC. However, you can likely expect a jump in manual queries that are posted in RAVE in the coming months as the cleanup efforts continue. You may recall a while back, we made an announcement that some of our pre-RAVE trials that collect data via the CRA Workbench that are still currently in long-term follow-up would transition to collect that follow-up data in RAVE. The transition for breast study S0221 was just completed a few weeks ago. So in case you didn't see a notice about this, the follow-up forms for that trial are now only accessible in RAVE. I wanted to give a reminder that any documents and memoranda that we've sent out regards to COVID are available in one place on the SWOG website by accessing the COVID-19 clearinghouse page. This is located on the first page after you log in. Just scroll down towards the bottom and you'll see it there under news and stories. We've been in process of updating both the ORP manual and the online clinical trials training course. It's still going to be a while longer before the CTTC is complete because many of us need to be back in the office to record the audio. But the ORP manual should be published soon, and we'll send out notification once it is. And then Dana mentioned this before, but again, we're always looking to hear from you for any additional training needs you might need. Please reach out to Lisa Barnstrom, our training manager at the SWOG Operations Office, if you have any ideas that would be helpful to you or to your site. Next slide. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn things over to Phyllis for some other updates from us.
Thank you, Rodney. Well, first off, here in Seattle, let you know the smoke has cleared, and now we have rain that set in, so we went straight from summer to smoke to fall. We also, everyone's talked a bit about what their local work situation is like, and here where we are located at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, we've pretty much been told to expect to work remotely through at least June of next year. So we are all in our new working environment. I'll provide an update on some topics, as Rodney said, about specimen collection and institution performance review. Next slide, please. The report you see here provides an update to the status of the various labs and repositories that are receiving specimens on SWOG trials. This report is posted in a number of places: the SWOG CRA Workbench, Specimen Tracking, and the COVID-19 Clearinghouse on SWOG.org, as well as on the CTSU. We had been updating the report weekly, but we do it less frequently now as the labs have settled into their new routines and not much has been changing. Next slide, please. Additionally, this table provides study-specific information about the specimens that are collected. It's a summary and not meant to replace the protocol for individual study requirements. If you're in the situation where you can only collect a subset of the required specimens, it's a way to identify which of the specimens are most critical and the shipping requirements for that specimen. Currently, it's posted on the Clearinghouse and Specimen Tracking, but it is being added to the CRA Workbench and CTSU. Next slide, please. I took a look at the data that we have regarding specimen submissions at the beginning of September. And at that point, there were 736 specimens from 205 patients that had not been submitted due to COVID-19. At first, I thought that number was surprisingly low, but in talking with the repository, they actually say they haven't really noticed too much of a downswing in the number of samples. So it looks like people are overall able to submit the specimens. But I do want to remind you that we can only identify those that were not submitted due to COVID if the reason COVID is located somewhere in the text of the reason the specimen not submitted. You can say something as short as COVID, or you can specify a longer reason, some examples of which are shown here. It is useful to have that if you find that useful for your internal tracking. And to note, even if on the COVID-19 deviation form you indicate that a deviation in specimen submission, in order to resolve the specimen expectation, you still need to use that function within specimen tracking. Next slide, please. As Rodney noted, we are now collecting data on deviations on the new form. As of early September, there were a total of 1,037 deviations noted. A third of those were due to phone or virtual visits, with the next largest category being a late or missed study procedure, followed by a late or missed study visit or study specimen collection. A very small number were called major, and I suspect that some of those may have been incorrectly coded. Elaine and her team will be reviewing those and be sure that they were categorized correctly. Also of note, most of the reported deviations were on studies where patients were still actively getting treatment. Any of the data, as Rodney said, any of the data that was collected on the log that was provided before the form was available still need to be submitted on this form. It's the only way that we can then consolidate the data for the submission for the CIRB review. Next slide, please. Just a quick reminder from CTSU that the reports that they push out to the sites from the data quality portal and the source document portal restarted in August. This is just the email, the quote directly from the email that they sent in case you had missed that. I don't have any further updates from them. Next slide, please. As far as the SWOG performance measures or institution performance review, I do have some data on the effects of the pandemic. This graph shows the number of data management institutions, or the parent level sites, that were out of compliance starting back in December of 2019. Prior to the pandemic, things had been fairly steady, and in fact, the number of sites out of compliance for the submission of initial form set was at an all-time low. However, once the pandemic hit, as we expected would happen, the non-compliance rate started to increase. As this was not unexpected, and because of the situation at all of your sites, we stopped sending out those warning emails. Next slide, please. However, we are still monitoring the data submission rates, and there are a few important things to note. If you're able to register a patient to a trial, you still must have all of the required baseline forms and documents. We understand that the systems that sites use to submit the requirements and thus resolve the expectations may have been impacted by changes in staffing and site operations in your labs. But we understand that things may be submitted later than usual, but we still will be expecting them to be submitted. Of note, the initial form set and items and specimens due more than 13 months ago should not be outstanding any longer. These were due substantially before that pandemic hit. Next slide, please. Here's where SWOG stands for the submission of the initial form set and specimens due more than 13 months ago. Prior to the pandemic, there were 5 sites who were overdue for initial form set and 1 for specimens, and it's now 18 and 19. The items due for the initial form set are almost exclusively baseline specimens. If these baseline specimens or any post-baseline specimens were not collected, which I suspect for the most part they were not, please remember to use the notify that a specimen cannot be submitted function within specimen tracking to get that expectation resolved. Next slide, please. Lastly, I suspect that we will be reinstituting institution performance. We will probably do it with the initial form set measure first. Before we do anything, we will give you a 1 month's head up before we start sending out any of the warning emails. Clearly, the pandemic has had an impact on the submission of data to the SDMC. However, we want to be sure that we continue to run our trials at the highest quality possible. Please continue to submit your data so we can all work together towards SWOG's mission of continuing to improve lives through cancer clinical trials and translation medicine research. I just want to thank you for all of the hard work under these really difficult circumstances, and I will pass it on back to you, Connie.
Thanks, Phyllis. I have to say, you guys at SDMC have also been seamless. We've been able to get responses, to find you, to get help. So just appreciate all the hard work. No one would ever know you are all working at home. So good job. Next up is quality assurance update. Bill, please advance. And Elaine Armstrong is our presenter. Elaine is the quality assurance manager for SWOG. Many of you know her well, but we welcome her to this forum. Thanks, Elaine.
Hi, Connie. Okay, I want to kind of continue on with the topic about reporting the deviations related to the COVID-19. Next slide. So first of all, variances from protocol requirements that were previously approved by CTEP are not considered deviations. One that I can think of is they announced that investigational agents can now be shipped directly to a patient. That's not normally allowed, so that is not considered a deviation. Some of our protocols have been revised to provide extended timeframes. And so if there's been a formal revision of the protocol, then that means those are no longer considered deviations if assessments or things like that are out of window. Then there are a lot of memos that have gone out just giving you temporary variances that are only in place for a certain amount of time. So those are not a formal revision, and so those would be considered deviations. But just keep in mind that these are deviations, but they do not necessarily result in a deficiency. And in fact, in most cases, you would not be getting a deficiency during an audit. I don't want to make a blanket statement that it would never result in a deficiency, but overall, this is just a way of collecting information that's important, but it's not going to affect you during audits. Next slide. So something that is happening a lot now is activities that are performed by a local healthcare provider. These are being done under the oversight of the responsible investigator, who's responsible to make sure that these, protocol requirements are followed, that clinical care is given for study. This is something that happens oftentimes even during normal times. You have a patient that lives 2 hours away, and so they have their labs done locally the day before so that they don't have to, it just makes it easier. They don't have to make a second trip to your site. So a lot more of that is going on now. More patients are having labs done, imaging done, physical exams done at their local providers. Any kind of treatment with non-investigational agents, such using commercial drug, even surgery or radiation, if those are obtained outside of the research site, are not considered deviations at this time. But you do want to make sure that you have processes in place to obtain all the data that you need. And if you cannot get the data, then at some point you have to say, no, this is not an acceptable deviation because, we're not able to get the lab data, or we're not able to get the treatment data. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. So I know a lot of people have questions on whether deviations are minor or whether they are major. So minor deviations are ones that don't impact patient safety or compromise the overall integrity of the data. So, our best practices document outlines minor delays. Well, they're addressed in there as in, it will give you protocol windows. So those windows that are allowed for assessments, for instance, if you're within those windows, of course, that would not be a deviation. But if you're outside of the windows that are allowed, usually delays are minor. Those are minor deviations. Usually a single missed assessment. You missed one set of labs, or you're not able to conduct an office visit. Those are usually going to be minor deviations. Substituting a phone or video conference with the study visit also is minor. Next slide. So the major deviations are those that could impact patient safety and affect, increase risk to the patient, compromise the study. So the NCI has clearly stated that for eligibility, any H&Ps that are part of eligibility need to be conducted in person. This is an example of when you cannot substitute a telehealth visit. So you need to, if the H&P or your performance status toxicity assessments are done through something other than an in-person visit, that would be considered a major deviation. Endpoint assessments are very important. So if you completely miss imaging that's due, at a certain time point on the calendar, that would be a major. If you missed labs for multiple visits, so now, the patients come in and they're on like their third cycle of treatment in a row with no labs being done, or toxicity assessments being done, you need to really consider whether or not it's safe to keep the patient on. So we would consider that a major. Substantial treatment delays, obviously, a few days or a week or two is probably not going to be a big deal. But if it's turning into a month, then that's probably going to be considered major. Failure to collect the research specimens. And I will be in contact with Phyllis after she mentioned that, they kind of have prioritized specimens. So it may be we can look at a way of prioritizing these also, whether it be minor versus a major. And then multiple missed visits while the patients are on treatment would be considered majors. So it's kind of an overview, but please contact us if you have questions on this. Next slide. So I know Dana touched on this, but remote audits are happening a lot. I'm currently in a hotel room because I'm out of town, having just completed an audit, on-site audit. The NCI CTMB has approved and endorsed remote auditing, and they are in the process of writing up SOPs to address remote audits, which I think will help a lot because some sites are very reluctant or not willing to have an off-site audit, but they also don't want you to come on site. So we're kind of like, well, we're kind of stuck. What can we do? So I think once they have an official SOP, I think that we can provide, I think that will be useful. But we try to conduct the audit process as similar to the on-site auditing as possible with, it's just that all the communication and exit interview are conducted by email or phone or video application. So regulatory documents can be emailed or uploaded. Your drug accountability records can be emailed or uploaded. And we've done some pharmacy reviews through a video app by walking around and checking the inventory and looking at the storage conditions. That's gone pretty well. Next slide. Ideally, giving us EMR access is the best thing because that makes it easier for the auditors, and it also makes it easier for you because having to upload a lot of documents, I know, is a lot of work. And we're fine with, we understand we have had to sign off on privacy statements and things related to HIPAA to get access. There have been a few sites that have just kind of gone a little overboard and we're not quite willing to sign their documents, but we are now getting access to the EMR in many, many more cases than we would have like a year ago. So that's working well. If you can't give us EMR access, then you'll have to upload the patient records. Currently, there's a couple of options. The CTSU has a new source document portal. Anybody who has had central monitoring done for a registration study has used not this exact portal, but this is similar. This is kind of it's in the works and there's things changing all the time. There's some restrictions on like how you can identify your documents or they don't upload properly. SWOG has a SharePoint site that we've been using and it works pretty well, but we've run into a few glitches. So we have now, we're actually having a call on Friday and with the group that is going to be working with us to design SharePoint sites just specifically for document management for audits. We even had one site who had their own local site portal that they uploaded documents and then they gave us access to their portal. So it's going well, and we have several auditors that work remote, are remote all the time because they don't live in San Antonio. So we're kind of used to doing things from all different locations, and the process is going real well. The majority of the registration study audits that are 1, 2, 3 cases are being done remotely. We've done some treatment audits remotely. I'd say at the most, perhaps 25 to 30 cases. We do have some sites after the first of the year where we're talking, large numbers of cases, perhaps 75 or 100 cases to be reviewed. And I'm reluctant to do those off-site just because I think the sheer volume is going to make it difficult. But, we will have to see what happens and, we'll work with sites to, sometimes if you live in an area of the country where it just is not looking likely that anybody's going to be able to visit on site anytime in the near future, then we definitely will consider doing things remotely. So I think the process is going to, get easier and smoother as we go by. And I think that's it, but I think that's my last slide. I'm not sure. You could advance it to see. Yeah, so that's all I have. And so I'll touch on this in a few other areas during the open forum tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. As always, great comments, great insights, and thank you for the flexibility that SWOG brings to this complicated world we're living in right now. So with that,
Connie, wait, can I just make one other comment?
Sure.
I know many of y'all know Leanne Larson, our assistant QA manager, and she's retiring. And next Wednesday is her last day.
Oh.
And but we're very fortunate because Vanessa Benavides, who was a project manager in the protocol department, has moved over into our department as our assistant manager. So it's wonderful to have somebody that's already got 2 years of SWOG under their belt to train versus trying to train somebody from the outside. So that QA mail at swog.org is always a really good way to reach us, because that way then that email will go to both Vanessa and I. And if someone's out, then somebody else, usually there's somebody that can then respond to you.
Thanks for sharing that, and also for letting us know about Leanne. So for those of you who have known her for years, I suggest we flood her inbox with thanks and gratitude. So at this point, I think I'll check with Caitlin Hutchinson from our Executive Operations Committee, who's helping today with facilitation of this session. Anything right now, Caitlin, to bring forward in the Q&A?
So there are just a few follow-up questions regarding all of the intricacies of remote monitoring and trying to work with this kind of new manner of working on things. In particular, Elaine, there's some detailed questions about whether Zoom may be an option for chart review or possibly maybe WebEx rather than other platforms. So I don't know if there's going to be variability there is one of the questions.
Well, that's interesting, because I guess I'm having a hard time picturing Zoom or WebEx for chart review, because, and trust me, I am definitely not any type of an expert on all these different applications, but now I know we have used it, or one of these type things where you're reviewing a chart, but that way someone is connecting through, say, Zoom and kind of walking you through the chart. So it is definitely applicable in that kind of a situation. But if we have to look at documents, I'm not quite sure how that would work with Zoom or WebEx, but hey, I guess we're open to trying it if that's what someone thinks would work.
So that's great. I know within the VA system that we have certain allowances. We're not permitted to use Zoom because of PHI and security, but we are permitted to use both Microsoft Teams as well as WebEx. And what our teams are preparing to do is to upload source that's not readily available in the EMR so that we can share screen both in the EMR per patient and then any relevant scanned outside source. So what we're finding locally as we kind of embark on these new ideas, Elaine and everyone else, is that you have to think about the workload for your coordinators to do the extra steps for scanning and organizing for a remote meeting. So
we'll have to give it a shot.
The other question we have regarding remote monitoring is just with new studies, how are we handling planning monitoring going forward within the COVID environment?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
I think that this is a question, I think regarding like SWOG 1806 or other trials that are opened new. Is there any moderation of how monitoring will proceed?
I mean, I think the timing, the volume of audits will probably stay the same. I think what for the registration studies, I would say our default is automatically going to be remote, unless because it's so easy to do, 1 or 2 charts remote. So I definitely say that would be our default. That is the plan. And then if the site says no, they would rather that we come on site, then we can look at that.
I think those are kind of where we're at with questions. Anyone else, if you'd like to ask questions right now, we'd love to see anything typed into the chat. I'm happy to help moderate.
Thank you, Caitlin. So we're going to move to announcements a minute to give you a couple more minutes to finish submitting questions before we move to our Thoughts on Life segment. Next slide, Bill. So this is just the beginning today, hoping that you're enjoying day 1 of the virtual meeting. And definitely for the Oncology Research Professional Sessions, there are 2 very important segments tomorrow. The Oishi Symposium is at 1 o'clock Central Time, and Open Forum begins at 2:30. And special thanks to our friends Christina Boeg and Stephanie Parker and Deb Bergevin, who worked really hard to put these together. So next slide, please. SWOG is all about ORP, and there's a strong conviction and support that we are the ones that make studies happen. So if you want to get involved at a deeper level, we do have several committee openings. There's an application process and link on the website. And here is the ORP execs at SWOG.org email through which you can ask any questions and someone will follow up with you. But we have a newly reconstituted membership committee and welcome anybody's interest to get deeply involved. Next slide. Also today, you've met a lot of people, especially if you're new to this. If you're looking for how to find folks, key SCMC contacts, for example, are listed on the CRA workbench. We also want to highlight the next SWOG group meeting, which we hope will be in person. These are the dates in San Francisco. Please mark your calendars. Next slide. Also, ORP has a new web page that just went live right before this meeting. So if you're looking for any members of the executive committee, there's an easier way to find us. You can log on to the SWOG member website, find member resources, and then you'll see that there's a dedicated page for oncology research professionals. Special shout out to Wendy Lawton and Annette Betley, who helped make this happen along with me. It's been a long time coming and we're super excited about having a new venue to start posting some updates and key help to finding resources. Next slide. This is just to reiterate what Rodney shared. If you're having trouble finding the newsletter right now, it is on the CRA workbench. Next slide. This is this one that was just released for fall. But if you have suggestions, do submit them to the email that Rodney shared, CRAnewsletter@crab.org. Next slide. And certainly ideas for future editions. And you can subscribe to the newsletter. Next slide. As we think about spring meeting, watch for some updates in January, early 2021. For scholarships for travel. The Hope Foundation has been significantly generous to ORP, and there have been funded traveler spots for all of our group meetings until now. So watch for that if you're interested in some travel support. Next slide. These are members of our ORP Executive Committee who work very hard behind the scenes all throughout the year. And I am deeply indebted to all of them for rolling up sleeves, coming alongside, and again, making transition seamless and keeping the work going through all the thick and thin of COVID and beyond. Next slide. Today, especially, thanking our speakers. We're working from lots of different settings and have had many different challenges, as have all of you, and yet our work continues. As we've shared, I think all of us, cancer has not stopped. So our work has not stopped and the need is great, if not greater than ever. And then special thanks today to Courtney Willie. I echo Dana's sentiments. Courtney has been phenomenal and the world will never know how long she has gone without sleep, I'm sure, but we are deeply appreciative of her phenomenal skill and expertise. And then to thank Caitlin Hutchinson. She's a new member to our executive committee and fearlessly agreed to help just facilitate this session. So my thanks to you, Caitlin. Next slide. And now for a little bit of fun and hopefully inspiration. We'd like to end today with help from all of you. And so we're going to give you 60 seconds. You'll hear some music playing. There's no right or wrong answer, but we'd like to ask that all of you help submit through our Q&A chat function something that you have done or found over this last 3 to 6 months that has brought you joy, or it's a silver lining that has come your way through COVID, a moment that you've had throughout this tough season that's brightened your life and given you joy. And then Caitlin's going to share some of those ideas with all of us. So cue the music, Bill. Okay, Bill, let's move to some comments. And so can you advance the slide? This one is one that comes from my world 2 weeks ago. I'll just start with that. The feeling of sand between your toes, no matter how cold, stepping on a sharp rock, feeling the wind, flying a kite, and these are my grands. Those are my joy and inspiration. So I'd like to open the phone here, the microphone, for Caitlin to begin to share some of the things that have been coming in from all of you.
So there's some really lovely ones here. I see the opportunity to slow down, which I think is important. We also see spending more quality time with my kids. Angela adopted a dog and is taking long walks and enjoying those. Dana has found real joy in virtual wine tastings. That sounds fun. I know it sounds like a toss-off, but I have a really deep interest in wine and being able to explore it during this time with a great Texas winemaker. Katie is excited for pregnancy. Congratulations. Pat says her cat's joining on WebEx calls. Quality time with dogs seems to be a really lovely theme. And daily meditation and appreciating even the smallest joys of the day. Taking the ever-changing times to really think about what it is most important and keep doing the work that they love doing, but finding a way to be closer to family. That's how moving from Tennessee to Michigan happened last month. So, and I'll add my 2 cents. I've really enjoyed hearing my 2 little boys playing and laughing in the background as I'm on conference calls. So Connie, I will pass it back to you.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing, everyone. We would like to kind of wind up here. So Bill, if you could go to the last slide. Sometimes the hardest times in life bring forward the most beautiful things. And as Dana shared, for example, and I think many of us can share from our perspective experiences in our offices, we've all learned a lot. So one quote, it's from an unknown source, it just says, "The most beautiful stones have been tossed by the wind, washed by the water, polished to brilliance by life's strongest storms." So knowing how hard you've all worked, we're all going to look totally better and more beautiful than ever the next time we actually get to see each other in person. These hardships are absolutely going to prepare us for the extraordinary. And we just want to commend you for your faithfulness, your dedication, and for all that you do for our patients. Caitlin, any other comments as we close?
To thank everyone for taking the time today, and I'm really looking forward to more positivity kind of as we ended. I'm looking forward to the hope of having an in-person meeting in the spring.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Bill, for sticking with us through thick and thin. And thank you all for staying on and enjoy the rest of this evening, but especially the rest of the week here at Virtual SWOG. Take care and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.